After multiple reports of mounting frustration at the White House over President Biden's increasingly low approval ratings, the commander-in-chief traveled to Los Angeles yesterday for the first in-person late-night talk show appearance of his presidency, this time on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Biden, however, quickly found himself in the hot seat with a barrage of questions on gun control, inflation, the failure of Build Back Better, etc.
Some reporting. The president again confirmed he would not use executive orders to deliver gun control. Let's watch.
An executive order. Trump passed those out like Halloween candy.
Yes, sir.
I did. Isn't that something that could happen?
Well, I have issued executive orders within the power of the presidency to be able to deal with everything having to do with guns, gun ownership, whether or not you have to have a waiting, all the things that are within my power. But what I don't want to do, and I'm not being facetious, I don't want to emulate Trump's abuse of the Constitution and constitutional authority. And so... And I mean that sincerely, because I often get asked, look, the Republicans don't play it square. Why do you play it square?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? If we do the same thing they do, our democracy will literally be in jeopardy.
Well,
not a joke. And
I understand that argument, but also it's like you're playing Monopoly with somebody who, won't pass go and won't follow any of the rules. And how do you ever make any progress if they're not following the rules?
We've got to send them to jail,
I'd like to live.
That was a good comeback.
I'd like to live in this world Joe Biden lives in, where democracy isn't already a shambles. I mean, I think Jimmy Kimmel is right here. Democrats spend all their time in office making arguments to their own base about why they don't have power to do what's clearly in their authority. And Republicans understand that their job, what their mandate is to work within the powers that they've been given to maximize what they've promised to their base. And that's why we get this ratcheting right effect over the course of the years. The country is not more to the right. The left hasn't gone crazy and gone left. We have both parties that are filled with elites that have abandoned the basic promises to the social safety net and the social contract that were supposed to be the foundation of the American dream. Wages are down even though productivity is up. People can't afford the basic cost of living. The education price is sky high. People can't afford to put gas in their car. And Joe Biden is acting like, well, it's okay for me to sit around and tinker around the edges because the impropriety of doing more would just be a hashtag bad look. And that's why people don't have any confidence in the Democratic Party anymore.
Well, but by the same token, I mean, they don't have a majority. They don't even have all.
We're talking about executive orders.
Right.
We're talking about executive orders.
No, right. So if he wants to get these things done, right, he needs to do it with the stroke of a pen, which then is going to be subject to scrutiny from the courts and so on, which, right, I know you want. But I'm saying if it was so popular and so great and everyone wants it so much, maybe Democrats would be able to assemble a majority coalition that wants those things, which they can't.
It doesn't matter. We spent 4 years under Donald Trump, much of which he did not have a united government, acting like the sky was falling and it was going to be the end of the world because he passed a whole host of items via executive order. And Democrats at that time, the rhetoric was that he was able to do with the stroke of his pen enough to ruin democracy. That was the kind of language that they used. Now, the whole conversation is about, well, it's too easy to undo. Well, if it's so easy to undo, why were you so pressed when it was Donald Trump doing it? And why don't you have any confidence that historically, oftentimes, people get used to the status quo and there isn't this rush to undo executive orders that people anticipate? Regardless, you are facing a really hard midterm election season, and at least demonstrating your willingness to go to bat for the people, and also drawing contrast between what the people want and what Republicans are obstructing, saying I was forced to do an executive order because they wouldn't agree to this simple lowball thing, is exactly how you enliven and energize your base. Not sitting here on national TV making excuse after excuse after excuse while you're the most powerful man in the world, but you can't do anything at all.
I mean, I don't know. Every time there's one president, the more executive orders they do, the more they open the door to the next person to even further grow the power of the executive branch.
So the next conservative shouldn't use so many executive orders. Well, that's not on Joe Biden.
Sure, and neither should the previous one. I mean, Bush did this, and then there was an expansion under Obama, and then there was an expansion under Trump, and Biden, actually, maybe to his credit, I think, is one to say, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, well, I was just trying to look up a quick list of how these executive orders have gone over time and who has used them more or who has used them less. It hasn't been linear, is what I recall. Let's see here. some of these charts, I'm sorry, they stop before we get to Joe Biden. But the point of the matter is, you cannot expect people to have faith in your presidency if you're willing to unilaterally disarm.
John Adams only had one executive order, according to this. That's my guy. That's my guy.
He probably had a much more cooperative
They look
government.
pretty. They look like they dramatically increase over time. Basically, looking down this list, TR, Woodrow Wilson,
but
major,
in contemporary history,
FDR, of course. Well.
And he got some things done.
I like to spend most of my time complaining about TR.
FDR with his
Wilson.
executive orders got a lot of things done and remains the
What
most
was Woodrow
historically
Wilson's
popular
executive
president in American history.
orders? Putting black people probably back and resegregating the federal service.
So popular he was, in fact, that they had to change the rules about how many times you were allowed to be president with all of those executive orders. So that demonstrates that people just want to see that presidents can get things done.
I don't know about that. The president also appeared to hit back at reports describing tension in the White House, telling Kimmel he has, quote, never been more optimistic.
I've never been more optimistic in my life, so I'll tell you why.
Why are you so optimistic? It makes no sense.
No, it does. There's a lot of major things we've done. But what we haven't done is we haven't been able to communicate it in a way that is, let me say another way.
Well, see, that's kind of perfect. Yeah, we haven't been able to communicate
but
it.
But look how the press has changed. Mm-hmm. Look how the press has changed.
It has changed. Oh, listen, I get it.
I know you overstand it.
Yeah.
You don't just understand it, you overstand it. But here's the deal. One of the things is that it's very difficult now to have even with notable exceptions, even the really good reporters, they have to get the number of clicks on nightly news. Mm-hmm. So instead of asking a question, anyway, it just everything gets sensationalized.
It's too much sensationalism among journalists. That's the real problem in this country, don't you think, Briahna?
I mean, look, he's obviously not wrong. There is a perverse incentive that's created by these algorithms. And I would note that they have gotten worse because of algorithmic publishing choices that have been made by some of these companies in recent years, which we have discussed on this show. But I think I'm increasingly believing that the problem is a little bit deeper than that. And part of why there is this political balkanization and people are pivoting away from mainstream news to finding individuals who they trust to filter their news through, right? Whether it's you have the people on your Twitter feed that are putting the articles in your feed, whether you go to a specific commentator like Joe Rogan or Russell Brand or whomever to get your news, it's because that is the best way people feel like they can have some sense of community and trust. It's about the individual, not about the idea that there's some like Glenn Kessler fact-checking machine behind anything. And that's because there's been an erosion of public trust. And the government and the President of the United States plays some role in that for him. So for him to abdicate all of that responsibility and put it on the media instead of asking this deeper question about how we no longer have these institutions that create a sense of American community, be it the media or be it church or be it these other places that used to exist in the past.
And you can't just say everything's great and the media is making it sound bad for clicks and for sensationalism. That has been true, throughout history. There's a lot of examples. Local media is always making crime seem worse than it is, and it is getting worse in some places, I would argue. But throughout the 90s, aughts, et cetera, there's all terrible, like local, if it bleeds, it leads kind of stuff. But look, you can't say everything's great and the media is blowing it out of proportion, right? Inflation is very high. People are struggling to feed their families. They don't have baby formula for their kids. There's a war going on that we're partly funding or contributing to. There's education costs are out of control. Medical costs are out of control. People are angry with each other. We're still in the grips of a pandemic. We're kind of coming to the end of it, but we're not totally prepared for the next one. It's bad times, so you can't, the media did not make that up. I don't like the way they cover it. I don't like the sensationalism either, but we're not living in these wonderful, magic happy land times, and the media is lying to you about that. I think it's getting the solutions wrong. It's playing for one team or the other, but is not the central fact that a lot of things have gone wrong. And you don't have to blame Biden for that, but you could think what he's doing is perfectly adequate, or you could think it's not nearly adequate at all. But things are not great. It's just
I also
not.
think your point about local media is important because part of what has eroded the public trust is that folks did used to be able to rely on their public their local newspapers.
Yeah.
And with the funding models that have changed, the advertising models, the influence of these tech companies, so many local papers have gone the way of the dinosaur. And so no one has a local reporter that's covering beat news that isn't as partisan and divided. They're just a local from the town who's invested in the interest in a very small population. And that has contributed enormously because now everyone's viewing the same top-down bifurcated trickle-down news system. And if Joe Biden wanted to address that issue instead of just, casting aspersions by increasing funding to those kinds of things and talking about other ways to support local news and local media, I would really love to hear that conversation. It'd be more productive.
I hear you. I think traditional news or the news that preceded the kind of the social media environment, that everything national that we're living through now. I'm not sure. We might look at it with rose-tinged lenses because this seems crazy and insane and everybody screaming at each other all the time. But I suspect there were a lot of ways in which even that news regime was very inadequate or was just manufacturing some kind of imaginary consensus on policy, on some very bad policies.
Policy, we're talking about local issues, garbage pickups, street holes. People have things in their lives that they care about, but it's very easy to distract them so that they think the most important issue in the world is a documentary about what is a woman instead of why it is that their municipality isn't able to deliver on the very basic needs of people in the community, garbage pickup, et cetera. So I do think that's a significant issue. And we will be talking about some of those bedrock issues more.
Like we'll also be talking about what a woman is maybe at some point. All right.